My name is Ken Brumley, and this is Lee Poe. And we are thankful for the MOPS group, the Moms group here at Green Acres Baptist Church. And recently we received a set of questions that have to do with relationships that take place in our homes, with families, with children, with husbands and with wives. And we'll probably be doing 2 or 3 of these. So we're excited to be able to get started with you. One of the very first questions that came up was, what are some good books for couples to read to strengthen their marriage? And there are many, many good books that are out there, and Lee, and we've attempted to read a lot of them. And there's a lot of stuff that is out there that after you read the first 2 or 3 chapters, you've read the whole book in there. One of my favorite that I go back to, basically by the way that it's written, is a book called The Meaning of Marriage by Timothy Keller. And he's a pastor up in the Chicago area, and he just has written so much good material about good Christian, marriages and how a man should love his wife and the wife should love the husband. Also, you just about can't beat boundaries in marriage. And that talks about roles that we play, and it's okay to say yes and it's okay to say no in marriage without losing your roles and your identity in all of that. But it really attempts you to keep things in and to keep things out in your marriage. What are some for you, Lee?
I have the same one, Meaning of Marriage, I think by Keller, is also an excellent choice. But I also put down a book that's really not a Christian book, but has some really great principles. It's called The 7 Principles That Make Marriage Work, and it's written by Dr. John and Julie Gottman.
It's good.
They're excellent help, and you'll find lots of things in there to work through. It's not just something you read. There are actually exercises you can do and questions to be answered, so it's a really helpful book. Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas is another one that I think is really good. It points out that God has a role in our marriage that is pervasive in everything that we do. And he's calling us to holiness, even in our relationship, not just happiness. Happiness is good, we want that, but we certainly want holiness too. And then one by Francis and Lisa Chan. Almost everybody knows Crazy Love, the book by Francis Chan. But it said You and Me Together, or You and Me Forever, by Francis and Lisa Chan. So it's an excellent book and really speaks to young people as they're building their marriage together. So,
I'll tell you one of the best books in the scriptures, of course, I believe is Philippians.
Yes.
Everybody always goes to Ephesians, the 5th chapter, and it goes through that. But I'm telling you that the 2nd chapter of Philippians, those first 6 verses are an unbelievable book on how a couple can come together.
Absolutely.
And love each other. I go to that all the time in counseling.
I use it too. But ultimately, whatever book both of you will actually read and both of you will actually work on and take lessons out of and put into practice in your life is probably the best book for you. So I really encourage you to pay attention to what you're doing with those books and use them for what they're intended to be, a really good guide.
And I don't want to assume that everyone has read the 5 Love Languages by Chapman. But if you and your husband would do that together, it is such a huge improvement if you'll just practice, beginning to speak each other's love language in there. The second question was this: how do you resolve the differences of sex drives in marriage? One spouse wants it often, but the other one doesn't. So, Lee, I'll let you start that first.
Well, I've never heard about this before. No, I'm just kidding. I hear it from both sides of the relationship. Sometimes it's the husband that wants more sex. That's typically what we think about. And sometimes it's actually the wife that wants more sex than the husband. So it does create a problem for the relationship. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 1 through 5 reminds us that we both have sex drives and that neither one of us owns our body in and of ourselves. There's a partnership that God has intended to take place in relationship so that when we're married, my wife owns me as well as I myself owning me. So we have that interplay that I need to consider all the time. Ken just mentioned Philippians chapter 2. Philippians 2:4 says this: not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. So it's really important that I practice this with my spouse. If I'm the one who is pressuring for more sex, then that would remind me I need to look to the interest of my spouse and take care with that and not put the pressure on for that, but to build the romance in the relationship that leads to a better sex life and to create that sense of intimacy and closeness overall that can encourage a healthy sex life. And if I'm the one who's on the other end of that and I'm really not as interested in sex as my spouse, it teaches me that I need to consider where they are and know that my first ministry in marriage is to my spouse, trying to reach out to them, care for them,
Right.
and meet the needs that they have.
Right. You know, I think it's just so important that it really is a mystery to me to find how many couples have never sat down together and just talked about sex.
Yes.
I mean, talked about what their needs are or what's good for them, what's not good for them. And sometimes just a basic conversation is one of the most amazing things of all, and it doesn't have to be contentious.
Right.
And I think that's what I hear in counseling so much is that usually it's laid on the man, but like I said, I hear women too, like you said, hear women too. It's laid on the man that he's someone who wants to have sex much more often than the wife does. But you also have to add in there God's design, how God put a man together, and having that drive so much more than a woman. That's scientifically proven also.
Sure.
But at the same time, when you bring a husband and a wife together, and they're willing to sit down and to talk about how personalities come into the sex drive and how it's expressed, it doesn't just have to be a win-lose, an acceptance-rejection thing. It really can come from the perspective of saying, this is about us. This is about both of us pleasing each other. And I don't know about you, Lee, but I've never known a marriage to where everybody had everything in common.
Exactly.
And everyone's timing was exactly the same.
Right.
Somebody's going to have a headache one day or the other, no matter what,
Exactly.
in marriage. But here's the deal. The greatest thing to me about sex and what makes sex so powerful is that you consider it with a point of kindness and a point of consideration in all things. If you take consideration out of that sex drive or even the receiving of sex or the giving of sex, then it's the old adage, which is better to be kind or to be right.
Yes.
And that always gets us in trouble.
Yes. If we could just learn the first two things about what the love chapter says about love, love is patient and love is kind. We just get those two things right, it'll solve a lot of problems. One of the things that I think is helpful is to use some books to spur on a discussion about sex. And I think that kind of opens the door for that. Some of the books that I've used in the past are The Gift of Sex by Cliff and Joyce Penner. I think that's an excellent overall book. It's almost like an encyclopedia of things, and it can spur conversation and discussion. The Way to Love Your Wife is a book that was written by Cliff for men, but I noticed the last chapter in that book says a word to the wives is sufficient. And they're assuming that the women are reading along with their husbands in the book. And I'm not bringing a book home about sex my wife isn't looking into to see what it says. Kevin Lehman, Dr. Kevin Lehman wrote a book called Sheet Music, and I think that's an exceptionally good book as well. And then for those couples that have been married for a while and things have just fallen off sexually, Restoring the Pleasure, also by Cliff and Joyce Penner, is an excellent workbook. I do have a caution. Do not just jump to the middle of the book where the exercises begin. Read the first part and work through all the questions and get to the dynamics of what creates a wonderful, healthy sex life first, and then you can move it forward from there.
Yeah. Well, I agree also that we go back to the 5 love languages again. And this is where two people really began to share points of intimacy. And it's not just intimacy in a sexual way, but intimacy where we are considerate and we're kind with each other. It's like the book that was written that great sex starts in the morning.
Yes.
And it really is something that's developed throughout the day, throughout the week. And is it possible for us to speak in consideration and to care and to touch in sensual ways without having intercourse? That's a powerful thing because many times wives are just saying, I want more intimacy, I want more connection, and want to feel valued more. And that changes the whole sex scene completely.
Absolutely. What you'll find, I think, is that non-sexual touches throughout the day are actually a better way to create intimacy in the relationship than every touch being a sexual touch. And ladies feel more honored by that, and they feel affirmed by that, and that intimacy is built around that. And then that can build later to more sexual touches in sexual times. So I hope that kind of helps with answering that question. And there's another question that's kind of on the heels of this a little bit. It says, my husband stays up way later than me. I've tried to express to him multiple times that it hurts my feelings when he won't come to bed with me at a decent time. How can I convince him to come to bed when I do? I'm talking like I go to bed at 10:30. He stays up until midnight. He wakes me up when he comes to bed, and this is just not sustainable when I have to wake up with the baby at 6 or 7 every morning. So,
sounds like there's a little something in there.
a little bit.
I'm sure she meant it well.
Yes.
You know, one of the things I've come to realize is the fact that we have the ability to manipulate our own body's clock.
Yes.
And I think about when I first read this question, I was thinking about those who do shift work and where they work all day one week and then they work from night all the way to the next morning. They have to be able to change those clocks pretty quickly. And so the idea of I can't just settle my mind down until 12 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning, I believe that if we practice it, even if we just practice going back 15 minutes at a time, if your 12 o'clock is when you finally go to bed or 1 o'clock in the morning is when you go to bed, if you'll just start taking that back 15 or 30 minutes at a time, and even going to bed and relaxing and sitting down, laying down together and beginning to talk or to close out your day is a powerful thing that you can do. But I just think going to bed, I talk to all young couples about it's just so important for you to go to bed together. Also, Lee, it's a tough time when the house is dark, everybody else has gone to bed. I don't care if it's a woman or a man, that these clocks are set different. It can be a tough time of sexual temptation where you're staying up late. And it can be struggling that way. One of the other things that I would mention real quickly is I found it's a great thing to be able to lay in bed with your wife and do breathing exercises, even doing muscle exercises, even the candle exercise where many of you have seen that before, to where it's you imagine as if there's a candle right on the very a light on the very end of your finger, and you can take in a large breath of air and let that air out in such a small way that it doesn't blow the candle out in your imagination. Now, there's even an app on your phone that you can use with that, of all things. But even doing exercise where you're tightening up different parts of your body, you're starting with your toes, going all the way up to the top of your head, and then going back down and releasing. The endorphins that are from the serotonin and everything else begins to slow down our body and begin to release those, and the endorphins feel so much better in all of that. So I would encourage to do that. The third thing is that when we talked about that concept of just consideration, coming in late, waking your wife up, I'm not quite sure. We must have missed that memo about that the wife gets up with a child.
Yeah.
Was the only one who gets up with a child, because I had the butt bump in the middle of the night many times where she didn't have to say what that meant.
Right.
I knew exactly what it meant.
Exactly.
So what are you thinking?
Well, I agree with you. It's so important for the creation of intimacy and maintenance of intimacy in a relationship that a couple go to bed together. That's really a needful thing. And spending that time talking with each other and communicating about the day, sometimes that's the only moments we have throughout the day to actually communicate in any kind of healthy way. But one of the things I did notice is there's a lot of emotion that's kind of built up around this issue. When I hear the wording that is coming out in the question, he won't come to bed at a decent times, and this is hurting my feelings, and this is not sustainable. I hear a lot of deep emotion. And when I see that in a couple, what it tells me is there's a need for some real problem-solving connection here. Sitting down, meeting, working out a compromise that both of you can live with. finding a way to deal with this. And you have to kind of throw out lots of different solutions. Each solution for the couple will be unique to their situation. I put down just a few. The idea, what are some of the solutions you can come up? Do you need to find a different type of sleeping arrangement? Can your husband get it with the baby every other morning? Can we have a set bedtime that we both agree to? Can you take a nap during the day? Do we need to hire a nanny? Can we sell off the kids, on the black market and get some cash? Right? I'm not suggesting that really, but the whole idea of we have to find a way to make this work because we're in this together, aren't we? We are bound to each other by a vow before God. And so working out a compromise, trying the best that we can to leave the emotions out of it for a while and just have a really open, clear discussion without labeling one person's behavior bad or wrong. Let's just say this is what's going on, and this is what I would like to see change. And these are some ways I think we could make it better.
One of the things that come to my mind also is that in discussing this and talking about it, there's a big difference between a compliment, a complaint, and criticism.
Yes.
And of course, the concept you catch more bees with honey than you do, with anything else. And there's a fine line with that. And to be able to be sure that if you're criticizing someone, that's not a lot of incentive to want to come to bed in the same way. But to be able to talk from a gentle voice and to say, I love it when, and it means so much when, and to keep that up rather than just being critical. Complaining is okay because you're talking about a certain situation without necessarily being negative.
Yes.
But I would really come from that positive perspective of this gives us time to be able to settle down and talk together, and I can do that best with you. Sure. Somewhat along that dialogue with that.
And I don't want to misinterpret someone's behavior or preferences and say, well, because they're doing this, that means they don't care about my feelings, they don't love me, they're not interested in our marriage, those kinds. I don't want to make those kind of projections onto something. I want to have that open, clear conversation like you're talking about because I think that's so important for a relationship.
Absolutely. And in closing on that area, I would just simply say that so often our wives relate that to a sense of value and a sense of being loved and wanting to be together. If they've been with the children all day long, and from the time the husband comes home, they are wrangling kids with supper and with baths and getting them settled down to the point where there really is exhaustion at the end of that day. And then for sometimes the husband to zone out with a TV or laptop or, iPad or whatever. That mom needs some adult talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Time. That's not always easy to do. Our next question has to do a lot with where we are today, Lee, and it just simply said, with all this COVID-19 stuff, my husband and I have different levels, and I want you to listen to this, different levels of fear, frantic germ control. Because we aren't on the same page, it causes strain. How can we help reduce the added stress?
Yeah, I understand that. These are scary times. There's no doubt about it. No one wants to catch COVID-19, and you don't want that to be brought into your family. So it is a time for compromise. And if you think about what compromise really is, it's both people moving away from their preferred position to accommodate someone else. So in other words, no one gets everything he or she may want. Having a conversation rather than a conflict about this is vital. We really need to think that through about how can we talk to each other. Listening to each other's thoughts and expressions of needs would really help to create a middle ground for us to work off of. Generally speaking, I think you and I would agree that men are more prone to risk than ladies are overall. John Eldridge's book, Wild at Heart, kind of talks about that a whole lot.
Absolutely.
And it's a really good resource to think through. But working hard to accommodate each other and find a balance in this, because the last thing I want is for anxiety to rule over something. But again, I don't want the concerns to be ignored. I want them to be addressed in a caring and loving way so that we make a plan that actually works for everyone.
Absolutely. You know, Lee, it's strange, but I'm hearing just as many positive things that are going on in marriages as negative things during COVID-19.
Yes.
You know, there was an initial report that came out of China that there were overblown amount of Chinese people that were going through divorce after having to stay together. But it's been really unique that as these families come together and as they play together and as they live together, there's some that are hitting that reset button.
Yes.
And saying, you know, we're in this together. We can't go anywhere and we can't get out. We've got to find a way to live together. And so I may be reading the wrong news, but I'm telling you, I'm seeing some very good stuff that's come out of it. One of the things that comes to my mind here is I have a question about were there any pre-existing phobias or anxiety issues before this COVID-19 comes along. The problem with anxiety issues is that it looks for easy targets. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to have a reason or purpose, but we can worry about anything or be anxious about a lot of things. And that was a pre-existing. And now when COVID-19 comes along and there's so much information, every time you turn on the TV, yes. I think one of the best things that I've heard on the internet today is how do you prevent having this virus? And one is wash your hands, and two, don't watch TV.
Yeah, exactly.
And I totally agree with that. I think if you watch either CNN or Fox News, you can work up a good sweat after a while and thinking that the whole world is getting ready to be destroyed in all of that. So if there's pre-existing anxiety or issues, I would really think through that and talk through that. And like you said, Lee, come to a place of compromise so that we can live in this thing together. No one loves to live when they're afraid constantly of everything. And then also, I just would remind you of Matthew 6. When I think about the scriptures, it's a neat thing in my mind as I think about not just what's there, but why it was written. And I believe that every subject that Jesus talked about was written because it was a common problem back then, just as it continued to be a common problem 2,000 years. And in Matthew 6, Jesus stops everything and says, I don't want you to worry about tomorrow. Oh, tomorrow has enough worry in and of itself. I want you to seek first the kingdom of God. And what a great, great solution for anxiety.
Yes.
And it's not just a Bible answer I'm trying to give you, but it's the fact that right there in the middle of the scriptures, after Jesus had just finished that Sermon on the Mount, he says, I want you to stop worrying. I just want you to stop worrying. And I want you to trust God in the midst of every bit of this. And Philippians, that fourth chapter, says exactly that same thing. Don't be anxious about everything, but in all things give thanksgiving. Right. Thankful for what you have and thankful for what you don't have. To me is a powerful, powerful thing.
That point of balance is so important in this because you see God is a God of justice and mercy. He's a God of grace and law. So there's balance throughout the scripture. And there are a lot of great verses out there that talk about facing your fears with faith. And then there are a lot of other verses that talk about considering each other's feelings. And so you want to find that balance point that works for you too. And that'll have to require some real discussion. You talked about great things or good things coming out of this COVID-19, sequestering and all. There was a radio host the other day was talking about, said it's like a hurricane has hit the entire nation. And the other guy piped up who's on there, which says, yeah, but the hurricane has organized our closets. So they kind of get what everybody's been doing in the background during this time. Oh, goodness. So there's a last question that we're going to address today is what is the best way to handle conflict in marriage when you're around your kids? And there's no way to get away from those kids right now because everybody's kind of compacted in there together. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think disagreeing is never wrong, even if it's in front of your children. The key is, what is your definition of disagree?
Yes.
Dishonoring or disrespecting and disagreeing don't go well together.
Right.
And it's the concept of the idea of, are you being considerate? But I stop for a moment and to think the very basic rule is this: it's not something we can't control. Yeah. And if it is a negative type of interaction that's taking place, then you are in control of how that negativity comes out to your wife. You're in control of the tone of your voice. You're in control of the concept of correcting your spouse. And I think that is something that I hear more often than not, Lee, is that couples get into this pattern of correcting each other or trying to correct them and how they're correcting the children. And there's always a right arm and a left arm. There's always one of the law and one of grace. And it's important from my perspective to stop for a moment and go back and to talk about how you were raised and how you were disciplined as a child. And those are as varied as the stars in the sky. Exactly. And we have a tendency to discipline our children the way that we were disciplined. And I know that my parents used, I don't even call corporate punishment, because anything close at hand was something that they could swing at us with. But switches, belts, I've been hit for the few sticks, but I never doubted my parents' love for me in that. And I never saw my parents correct each other in front of us kids as a whole. So to me, those are some of the things that you've got to think through. How do we practice and practice and practice respecting each other at all times? Because those little ornery critters are watching.
You bet they are.
And sometimes when I see children disrespecting their parents, it's because those parents have disrespected them in front of those children.
You're right. Someone has rightfully said children are God's little spies. You know, they're kind of watching all the time about what we're doing and how we treat each other. And they emote to that. They react to that emotionally if they see harsh treatment. And I don't want to train them up saying this is the way families are supposed to work. We're told in Ephesians 4:26 to be angry, but do not sin. So we have control. God has told us that we have that opportunity to control what we're doing. So part of this answer, like Kim was saying, is not that you conflict, but how you're conflicting. If you're using angry words, name-calling, unhealthy ways of communicating about things, then yes, that needs to be isolated away from the kids. That's not healthy for them to watch or to see. But if they see you having conflicts, that lets them know that if you're doing it in a healthy way, that you can have conflicts and still love each other and everything's going to be okay. And if they see you having a conflict, then they can also see you making up and loving each other and showing that it's okay. You move beyond that. Otherwise, we create the other side of a false picture of marriage, that there is no conflict ever. And I'm not sure that's humanly possible, at least not at the Poe house where I live.
Yeah.
So we want to make that a conflict that happens in healthier ways. And there are a lot of scriptures that talk about managing conflict in healthy ways. We've included a lot of scripture on a handout that's going to be made available to you so that you can download our notes for what we're speaking from today and a lot of the scriptures that go with it.
You know, and in closing here today, I just want to encourage each of you as husbands and wives out there that when we hear of issues that are taking place in a family, whether it has to do with children, whether it has to do with the concepts of sex or just communication together, you've heard us both say that it's so important that we protect and that we nurture that relationship at all costs.
Absolutely.
It is, if you don't get anything right, if you'll take the idea, what does it mean to nurture, to take care of, to feed that relationship, and to really to do your very best to take care of it and protect it at all costs. It's sort of like your job at work. There are things that we don't say or things that we don't do, even if we're thinking and feeling those things. Why? Because your job's more important than your opinion or your feelings, so you protect that. And if we begin to look at our marriage like that same thing, what are some boundaries we place? What are the rules of engagement that at this point we're not going to compromise whatsoever?
Yes.
I don't care if the house is burning down. These are some things we do not do. Here are things that we do in a positive way. And I just think if we'll take care of and nurture and protect that relationship at all costs, so many of these issues that we're talking about today will take care of themselves.
Absolutely.
Well, on behalf of Lee Poe and myself, thank you so much for allowing us to be with you today.
Yes.
And look forward to it in a couple of weeks and maybe being back with you once again. So you have a good day today. God bless you all.
Thank you.